I stood in front of my son's grave, bracing myself against the chill that always came with these visits. Then I heard it. The sound of a child laughing drifted across the quiet cemetery. I turned and froze. A little boy was there, clutching a teddy bear I hadn't seen in decades, the very same one I'd given Arthur on his 5th birthday. He had the same eyes, the same crooked smile, and even the same dimple in his chin. And standing behind him was a young woman whose face went pale the instant she noticed me. She pulled the boy close, as if I were a threat. The child called Arthur Papa, and my world tilted. I thought I came to mourn my son, but instead I walked straight into a secret I never expected. For years had passed since Arthur's death, yet the ache was still sharp. The gates of the cemetery groaned shut behind me as I nodded at the caretaker, who knew my routine well by now. Every Thursday at 10 o'clock, I made my way across the eastern plot where generations of Vances lay beneath identical gray stones. My heels tapped against the path as heavy clouds gathered overhead, promising rain before noon. I carried white roses, the same as always. Habit brought me past my husband's grave, past my parents, until I reached the newest marker, the one I still couldn't accept belonged to my child. The scent of damp grass filled the air, mingling with the sweetness of spring trying to push its way in. I was already thinking about the company reports waiting on my desk, and the acquisition meeting scheduled for the next day. Work had become my shield, but when I reached Arthur's stone, I noticed something unexpected. A small bunch of wildflowers rested against it, daisies and black-eyed Susans. They weren't mine. My brow furrowed. Julian only came on birthdays and Christmas, and Arthur's old friends had stopped visiting years ago. Before I could make sense of it, the sound returned. A burst of laughter, bright and unrestrained, too alive for a place filled with silence. I stepped behind an oak tree, feeling like an intruder in my own family's resting place. On a blanket in front of Arthur's grave sat a young woman, no older than 30. Her dark hair was pulled back into a simple ponytail, her jacket a bit worn, her jeans patched at the knee. Beside her, a little boy bounced with excitement, speaking to the headstone as though it were listening. And then Mr. Bear was very brave at the doctor, he said proudly, holding up the faded stuffed bear. The sight hit me like a blow. That bear was Benson, Arthur's Benson? The one I had bought for his birthday, the one he had clung to until middle school, the one that had gathered dust on his shelf through college. And now here it was, hugged tight by a boy who could only be his son. My breath caught as I studied the boy's face. His eyes had that same blue tilt Arthur carried, his smile rising a little higher on the right side, the same tiny cleft in the chin. It was like watching my son return as a child. I steadied myself against the tree trunk, suddenly dizzy. "Tell Papa more about the doctor," the woman prompted softly. "Papa." She was encouraging him to talk to Arthur's grave, as if my son were still alive. The boy looked about 4 years old. Arthur had died exactly 4 years ago that day. The timing was impossible to ignore. Had my son known? Had he realized he was going to be a father before the accident took him? The boy's small hands made the bear hop along the headstone like an old friend. This wasn't their first visit. The way he spoke, the ease in his manner, told me they had been coming here often. "Leo, be gentle with Benson," the woman reminded him. Benson. She knew the bear's name. The boy glanced up at her, and then nodded solemnly, hugging the toy closer. So his name was Leo. I remained hidden for a moment longer, watching them. The woman's gestures were familiar in a way that stung. The way she smoothed his hair back was the exact motion Arthur used to do when he was little. Something inside me shifted, and I stepped out from behind the tree. The movement caught her attention immediately. Her head whipped toward me, her eyes widening in recognition. She knew who I was. Leo looked up, oblivious to the tension. "Hi," he chirped, patting the stone. "This is my papa." Her body went rigid, her hand pulling Leo protectively closer. "Who are you?" I asked, though my voice wavered beneath the calm tone. She swallowed hard, her eyes flicking toward the cemetery gates, as if measuring the distance. "That boy," I said firmly, staring at Leo. "He has my son's eyes." The child looked back and forth between us, still smiling, still clutching Benson. "I'm sorry," the woman whispered. "We should go." Her hands trembled as she gathered their things: an empty juice box, a container of apple slices, the edges of the blanket. "That bear," I said quickly, pointing. "That's Benson, Arthur's bear. I bought it for him when he was 5. The ear was torn when he tried to save it from our dog." Leo's face lit up with wonder. "You knew Benson when he was brand new?" he asked. "I did," I told him softly, "and I knew your papa." The woman stood now, folding the blanket with sharp, nervous movements, sliding a backpack onto her shoulder. "Please," I said, my hand out slightly. "Don't go. What's your name?" She hesitated. "Alena," she said finally. "Alena Garcia." I could see regret cross her face the second the words left her mouth. "And you knew my son," I said, not as a question, but as a statement. Her jaw tightened, and she gave a small nod, her grip tightening on Leo's shoulder. "You're his mother." "Yes," she answered, her voice firm now, protective. "And Arthur was his father." "Yes." "Why didn't you come before?" My voice cracked, but I pushed on. "Why hide him from me?" I missed his first steps, his first words, his birthdays. For years of moments I never knew existed. Her face twisted with something between fear and guilt. "I should never have come here," she whispered. "It was selfish. But Leo asks about his father, and I wanted him to feel some connection." "Please," I said, pulling a card from my purse. "Take this. Call me, whatever you need." "We don't need anything," she said quickly, backing away while pulling Leo with her. "Mama, can we finish our picnic?" Leo asked, confusion in his eyes. "Not today," she said firmly. "We have to go." But I didn't finish telling Papa about the doctor. He pouted. "Another time, Leo." She was nearly dragging him now. "Wait," I called out. "Please." Leo turned as they hurried down the path, waving Benson's paw. "Bye, lady," he shouted cheerfully, and then they were gone, slipping through the cemetery gates, leaving me frozen in place. I stood there, staring at the gate long after they vanished. My grandson, Arthur's son, the same bear I'd bought nearly 30 years ago, now held in his tiny hands. My driver appeared at my side. "Everything all right, Mrs. Vance?" he asked gently. I didn't answer at first. I looked down at the wildflowers propped against Arthur's stone, then at the white roses still clutched in my hand. "Yes, Thomas," I said finally, forcing my voice steady. "Take me back to the office." On the way to the car, I knelt by the grave and laid my roses beside the daisies. My fingers brushed across the carved letters of Arthur's name. "You had a son," I whispered. "He has your eyes, your smile, and he carries your bear." My throat tightened until it hurt. "Why didn't you tell me?" The marble gave me no answers. But for the first time in 4 years, I felt something stirring inside me that wasn't grief. It was sharper. It had purpose. I rose to my feet with a quiet promise. I'll find out the truth, and I'll take care of your boy. By the time I reached home, the sky had opened, and rain streaked across the windows. The drive back blurred into nothing but thoughts of Leo, his dimple, his laughter, the way he hugged Benson. Grandson. The words still felt foreign on my tongue. Thomas held the door open when we arrived. Will you be needing anything else, Mrs. Vance? No, thank you, I said. I'll be in my study. The house greeted me with silence, the same oppressive quiet that had settled in since Arthur's passing. I walked straight to my study, the one room that still felt like mine. The mahogany-paneled walls glowed in the afternoon light streaming through tall windows. Arthur's Harvard diploma still hung near the fireplace. I had never been able to take it down. I slipped off my coat, poured myself a small glass of scotch, and sat at the heavy desk where so much of my life had unfolded, signing acquisitions, helping my sons with homework, planning Arthur's funeral. My hand drifted to a silver frame on the corner. Arthur, at his 30th birthday, laughing, his last birthday. I couldn't wait. I reached for the phone and dialed a number I had known for 20 years. Delaney, came the voice on the second ring. Frank, it's Amelia Vance, I said, my tone clipped but urgent. Mrs. Vance, what can I do for you? I need your help. Something personal and completely confidential. Of course. I took a sip of scotch, steadying myself. There's a woman named Elena Garcia, I said, the name foreign but heavy in my mouth. She has a 4-year-old son named Leo. Even saying it aloud felt unreal. I believe he's Arthur's child. Silence followed on the line. Frank understood the weight of what I'd just said. I need you to verify everything. Where she lives, her background, her safety. Most of all, if they're in danger. Do you think they're in some kind of danger? Frank finally asked. I don't know, I admitted. But she looked terrified when she saw me. Not guilty, frightened. What exactly do you want me to find out? Everything, I said firmly, but do it quietly. If that boy is truly my grandson, I don't want to drive them away again. I understand, Frank said. I'll begin right away. The study door opened, and I nearly jumped. Julian stepped inside as I hung up the phone. I hadn't even heard him come in. Frank, I need to go, I said quickly into the receiver. Call me as soon as you have something. I set the phone down, composing my face before turning to my surviving son. Julian looked as though he had just left a board meeting, his dark suit pressed perfectly, his hair combed neatly, every detail precise. He carried himself with the polish he had sharpened over these last years, taking on the responsibilities Arthur once shouldered. In some ways, he reminded me more of his brother now, though he would never accept the comparison. Mother, he said, leaning down to kiss my cheek. I thought I'd check on you. I know today must be difficult. I nodded, my throat tight. The anniversary is never easy. He settled into the leather chair across from my desk, unbuttoning his jacket with practiced ease. How was the cemetery? He asked casually. Something in me hesitated. Julian and I had grown closer since Arthur's death, not by choice, but by necessity. He had risen to his role in the company admirably, but this secret felt fragile, almost dangerous to share. And yet, I found myself testing him, if only to gauge his reaction. I met someone there, I said carefully. A young woman and her little boy. They were sitting by Arthur's grave. Julian's eyebrows lifted. At our family cemetery. Yes, I answered. And the boy, he looked exactly like Arthur. Julian stilled, his composure momentarily slipping. What do you mean? I mean his eyes, his smile, even Benson Arthur's old bear. The child was holding it. Julian's expression flickered with surprise. That's quite a coincidence. It's not a coincidence, I said firmly. The woman confirmed it. He's Arthur's son. Julian leaned forward, his expression shifting from surprise to concern. Mother, that seems awfully convenient, doesn't it? A woman and a child appearing for years later at the cemetery. They didn't appear, I countered. They were already there when I arrived. Even so, his tone softened, almost patronizing. Think about it. A woman claiming her child belongs to a wealthy man who has passed away. It's a very familiar kind of scheme. His words struck me like ice. You didn't see him, I said quietly. He looks just like Arthur. Julian reached across the desk, covering my hand with his. Mother, I know how much you miss him. I know how badly your heart wants this to be true. But we have to be realistic. People do their research. They know how to prey on grief. She wasn't asking for anything, I said quickly. In fact, she tried to leave the moment she saw me. He gave me a patient smile, one that felt rehearsed. Of course she did. That's part of the act, make you chase her, make you feel like you're the one reaching out. I pulled my hand back. I've already hired Frank to look into her, I told him. Something flickered in his eyes too fast to identify, gone before I could be sure if it was concern or annoyance. That's wise, he said smoothly, but let me handle it. I'll protect you from disappointment. You've suffered enough. Thank you, Julian, I said carefully. But I want to see Frank's report first. He stood, buttoning his jacket again, his face a perfect mask. Just promise me you won't contact her until we know more. Women like this, they're experts at pulling on emotions. I'll wait for Frank's report, I repeated. When he left, silence reclaimed the room, but something about his reaction lingered in my mind. It didn't sit right. It was like listening to a piano just slightly out of tune. A week later, Frank returned with a file tucked under his arm. He came into my study while the grandfather clock ticked softly in the corner. The weight in his expression told me everything before he spoke a word. She wasn't lying, he said, placing the folder on my desk. I opened it slowly, my fingers trembling. Inside were photographs, records, documents that carried the undeniable marks of truth. The first photo nearly stole the air from my lungs. Leo, standing in a park, sunlight catching in his hair, clutching Benson as though it were his lifeline. His smile was Arthur's smile. My eyes stung, and I pressed the picture closer, as though proximity could bridge the years I'd lost. This is him, I whispered. Yes, Frank said softly. DNA would confirm it, but anyone with eyes could see it. He's Arthur's boy. The second photo showed Elena outside a small apartment building, groceries balanced on one hip while Leo tugged at her sleeve. Her face looked tired, but her hands still reached down to ruffle his hair. She wasn't living in luxury. There were no designer clothes, no new car, no signs of scheming for wealth. Frank slid another document toward me. Birth certificate. Lists no father. Leo Garcia. Born 3 weeks after Arthur's funeral. I traced the letters with my fingertip, tears threatening again. Arthur never knew, or maybe he did, and he never told me. She works at a diner, Frank continued. Barely makes enough to keep up with rent. No debts outside of medical bills. No suspicious connections. Nothing to suggest she's using the boy for leverage. I nodded, though my throat was too tight to speak. And the bear? I asked finally. Frank gave a faint smile. Arthur left it with her. Apparently, he visited often during her pregnancy. The neighbors remember seeing him there. My heart clenched. So my son had known. He had chosen to share that piece of his childhood with his unborn child. Why didn't she come forward? I whispered. Frank hesitated. She said Arthur never introduced her to his family. She assumed you wouldn't approve. After his death, she didn't want to fight a powerful family. She just wanted to protect her son. The room tilted for a moment. I thought of the boardrooms, the galas, the newspaper profiles, our family name polished like marble. And in the shadows, a young woman raising Arthur's son alone, without recognition, without help. Frank cleared his throat gently. There's more. He slid one last photograph forward. It showed Julian, standing at the same cemetery gates, speaking with Elena. His hand was pressed firmly against her arm. Her face was pale, her shoulders drawn tight, Leo clinging to her side. My stomach turned cold. Where did you get this? I asked. Security camera from a florist across the street, Frank said. It was time-stamped 2 days ago. He told her not to come back. The photo blurred as my hands shook. My son, my surviving son, Julian knew. He had seen Leo, and instead of bringing him to me, he tried to erase him. I waited until evening before confronting him. The house was too quiet, the kind of silence that makes every sound echo louder. Julian came in from the garage, loosening his tie, as if nothing in the world was wrong. Mother, he said smoothly, you're still awake? Yes, I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. We need to talk. He studied me for a moment, sensing something heavier than small talk. All right, he said carefully, taking a seat across from me. I laid the photograph on the table between us. Julian froze. His eyes darted to the picture of him gripping Elena's arm outside the cemetery gates. I know everything, I said quietly. She's raising Arthur's son, my grandson. And you tried to keep them from me. His composure cracked for just a second before he smoothed it over with that same politician's calm he always wore. Mother, you don't understand. I understand perfectly. I cut him off. You saw Leo with your own eyes. You knew he was Arthur's child. And instead of telling me, you tried to shut the door on him. Julian leaned forward, his jaw tight. That boy is a complication we don't need. Do you realize what the press would do if they found out? Do you know what shareholders would say about a hidden child born out of wedlock? That boy, I said, my voice trembling with anger, is my grandson. He's Arthur's legacy. He's family. Julian's mouth hardened. He's a liability, a reminder of choices Arthur made recklessly. We've built a reputation on control, on stability. You'd throw all that away for a woman who kept herself hidden for years. My hands clenched against the table. She kept herself hidden because she was afraid of us. Afraid of you, and you've proven she was right. For the first time, Julian's mask slipped completely. His voice rose, sharp and cold. I'm the one keeping this family together. I've carried the company, our name, everything Arthur left behind. You think a diner waitress and her child deserved to share in that. My heart broke, not for Elena, not even for Leo, but for the boy sitting in front of me, my surviving son, who had hardened into a stranger. You've carried the company, yes, I said softly, but somewhere along the way, you put profit above blood. That's not family, Julian. That's business. He pushed back from the table, standing tall, his expression a mask of fury. If you bring them into this house, if you acknowledge them publicly, don't expect me to stand by it. My chest tightened, but I lifted my chin. If that's your choice, then so be it. I won't deny Arthur's child just to keep you comfortable. We stared at each other, the distance between us deeper than any argument we'd ever had. At last, he turned on his heel and walked out, the slam of the door shaking the frame. I sat alone, staring at the photo of little Leo with Benson in his arms. Julian might have chosen power, but I would not abandon love. Not again. I picked up the phone, my hand steady this time. Elena, I said when she answered. This is Amelia Vance. I'd like to meet you and your son properly. The cafe smelled faintly of burnt coffee and warm bread when I walked in. It wasn't the kind of place our family ever frequented, no crystal glasses, no polished silver, but it had a quiet charm. Elena was already there, sitting by the window with Leo. He was coloring on a paper placemat, Benson propped against his juice cup, as if keeping watch. For a moment, I just stood in the doorway, watching them. The scene was so ordinary, so gentle, it made my heart ache with everything I'd missed. Elena noticed me and stiffened, her hand instinctively reaching for her son's. But she didn't leave. That alone gave me hope. I crossed the room slowly and stopped at their table. May I join you? I asked softly. Her eyes searched mine, cautious and guarded. Finally, she nodded. I slid into the seat across from them, my palms pressed together to keep from shaking. Leo looked up, his smile as bright as the spring sun. Hi, lady, he said cheerfully. Hi, Leo, I whispered, my throat thick. I brought you something. I reached into my bag and pulled out a small tin of cookies, the same kind I used to bake for Arthur when he was little. Leo's eyes widened. Are those chocolate chip? They are, I said, sliding the tin toward him. His joy was so pure it nearly undid me. Elena's gaze softened as she watched him, though her shoulders remained tense. You didn't have to bring anything, she said quietly. I wanted to, I replied. Silence settled for a moment, broken only by the scrape of Leo's crayon. Finally, I drew in a breath. I know who he is, and I know who you are. I don't want to take him from you. I only want to know him, to love him the way I should have from the start. Her eyes filled, though she blinked the tears back. You don't understand what your world is like. The money, the pressure, the eyes on everything you do. I didn't want that for him. I do understand, I said softly, and I can't undo the past. But Arthur's gone, and Leo deserves more than secrets and shadows. He deserves family. Elena's hand tightened around her coffee cup. Julian already came to me. He told me to disappear. My chest clenched. I know. That's not what I want. You don't have to hide anymore. Leo looked up then, chocolate smudging the corner of his mouth. Grandma, he asked, tilting his head. The word hit me like a prayer. I nodded, tears spilling freely now. Yes, sweetheart, I'm your grandma. Elena covered her mouth with her hand, overwhelmed. Leo giggled and held Benson out toward me. You can hug him if you want, he said. I reached for the worn bear, cradling it against my chest, the same way I had done with Arthur decades earlier. It felt like time had folded in on itself, bringing me back to what mattered most. In that small cafe, beneath the hum of an old ceiling fan, I knew I had found my way back to love. The decision came to me late one night as I sat alone in the study. The house was silent, but my heart was restless. For weeks I had visited Leo quietly, slipping into that little cafe or stopping by their apartment with groceries or small gifts. Each time I saw him, the bond grew stronger. He wasn't just Arthur's child anymore, he was mine too, and hiding him from the world felt like betraying him all over again. The next morning, I called Frank. I want it made official, I told him. I want Leo recognized as Arthur's son, as my grandson. Whatever legal steps need to be taken, begin them. There was a pause on the line. Mrs. Vance, he said cautiously, you know this won't be quiet. It will reach the press, the shareholders, the board, and Julian. Julian has already made his position clear. I interrupted, but this isn't about him. It's about Arthur's son. And I will not let fear or pride erase that child's existence. 2 weeks later, I stood in front of the boardroom's long glass table, my reflection fractured across its polished surface. Executives shifted in their seats, whispers cutting through the air. Julian sat at the far end, his expression cold, his jaw clenched. I have an announcement, I said, my voice firm. This family, this company, has prided itself on legacy. Today, I introduce you to the future of that legacy, my grandson, Leo Garcia, son of the late Arthur Vance. Gasps echoed around the table. Julian shot to his feet. Mother, this is madness, he barked. You're destroying everything we've built. I didn't flinch. What we've built, I said evenly, means nothing if it can't make room for truth. Arthur had a son. That boy exists whether you accept him or not. And I will not allow him to grow up believing he has no place in this family. The room buzzed with shock, but I kept my eyes on Julian. He was pale, furious, his hands gripping the back of his chair as though to steady himself. You'll regret this, he hissed. No, I replied, my voice steady as stone. I regret every year I didn't know my grandson. I won't regret claiming him now. Later that evening, reporters clustered at the gates of our estate, their flashes lighting up the night. I stood on the steps with Elena beside me and Leo holding my hand, Benson tucked under his arm. The questions came like waves shouted, insistent, hungry for scandal. But when Leo looked up at me, his small hand gripping mine tighter, the noise faded. For the first time in years, I felt peace. Not because the fight was over, but because I had chosen love over appearances. Arthur's legacy would live on, not in stock prices or polished headlines, but in the laughter of a little boy who finally knew where he belonged. Julian fought me at every turn. He challenged the announcement in private meetings, stirred doubts among the shareholders, even tried to push me aside in the company I had built with his father. But the tide was shifting, and he could feel it. Every article that came out painted Leo not as a scandal, but as the innocent heir of Arthur's bloodline. Public sympathy leaned toward us, not him. One evening, the confrontation came to a head. We were in the great hall of the estate, the portraits of our ancestors staring down like silent witnesses. Julian stood in front of me, his face pale, his shoulders trembling with anger. He could no longer disguise as calm. You've ruined me, he spat. You've ruined everything. No, Julian, I said quietly, my voice heavy with sorrow. You ruined yourself the moment you tried to erase your own nephew from existence. He paced, his steps sharp against the marble floor. You think they'll accept him? A child from a woman with no name, no pedigree. They already have, I said firmly, because what matters isn't pedigree, it's truth. And the truth is that Leo is Arthur's son. My words hit him harder than I expected. His chest heaved, his hands clenched. For once, the perfect mask he wore had shattered completely. Finally, his knees gave out. He dropped down before me, his pride cracking under the weight of what he had lost. I only wanted to protect what was ours, he said, his voice breaking. I looked down at him, my heart aching, torn between anger and the love only a mother can carry. You wanted to protect power, I answered softly. And in doing so, you nearly destroyed your family. At that moment, little footsteps pattered into the hall. Leo, still clutching Benson, peeked in from the doorway, Elena hovering nervously behind him. "Grandma," he called, his small voice carrying through the silence. I opened my arms, and he ran to me without hesitation. Julian bowed his head lower, unable to meet the child's eyes. I lifted Leo onto my hip, the bear squashed between us. "Everything's going to be all right now," I whispered to him, and for the first time in years, I believed it. Because love had finally broken through where pride had once ruled. Arthur's legacy would not be silenced, and neither would mine.